to provide. Then let me set the agenda for today's discussion. As I said earlier, we will be talking about Singapore, but we will not be talking about standard textbooks, what really Singapore story is all about. We'll be trying to understand what the flawless administration of Singapore. We'll also try to understand how Singapore achieved this rapid GDP growth, and also try to understand the strict legal framework that Singapore has. But that's one side of the story. We'll also bring the other side of the story in the discussion and try to make it more balanced. To bring the other side of the story, we'll have three questions that are really coming into my mind. I want to ask to him, does a lesser democratic style of government really help in building sustainable development growth or not? That's the first question. The second question that we would really like to pose to him is, for hyper growth, should a country compromise on its democratic credentials? And the third question that is really going to be important is, has Singapore, through this economic model, differentiated this gap between the rich and the poor? So these are the three questions that I'll leave with you for the discussion. Without taking any long, let me invite now Leong to give his the lecture. And Mr. Leong, you'll have around 40 minutes for your lecture. Okay, and I think before we move on and I'll hand over the mic to you, the President would like to welcome you once. Thank you. Okay, so we can start with the lecture.
Greetings from Singapore. That, Samantha, is the longest introduction I've ever had. Thank you so much when I speak. I normally start with a funny story, but actually it has not been funny for me the last few days. I apologize for not standing up to speak to you, because after flying 100 hours to 4 countries to speak, I developed a minor slip disc. The doctor and the physiotherapist say I need a month to recover, and so I do apologize. I would normally be standing up, if not walking around when I speak. Here's my funny story for you. I normally speak at conferences that are organized by governments, not the opposition. I've spoken at places like the Ibero-American Heads of Government Summit, Business Roundtable in Costa Rica, the Organization of American States, OAS, General Assembly, Business Roundtable in Fort Lauderdale, USA. It is a distinct pleasure for me to be speaking only for the second time in my life, I'm 72 years old, to an opposition. As Samantha told you, slight correction. It did not happen last year. In 2020, I was invited to speak in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, in a fundraiser for the largest component of the opposition coalition. Surprisingly, 2 months after that, there was a snap election and it became the government. Unexpected, they overthrew the ruling party of 60 years. And so now, 6 years later, the coalition opposition in parliament is still in power. I've never seen or spoken with so many media video cameras, I think about 10 looking at me, and so many mics from the media. Today, I will speak on governance, democracy, growth, policy lessons from the Singapore model. You know why governments like to invite me to speak? And perhaps that was why the Malaysian opposition asked me to speak. Because here's what I always say. A government, or perhaps for the matter an opposition, that can adapt the Singapore model well, may get to stay in power forever. Because if you have consistent economic and social development for the people, they will always work for you. Look at the Singapore political history and experience. The same ruling party in power for 16 years, 60 years since independence in 1965. Today, they have 90% of the seats in parliament. In the last election, they won 67% of the votes. But let me say this. In my view, arguably, it's not good for democracy if you have one party overly dominant for too long. Because, as history will show you, extreme success breeds complacency. Yesterday, I delivered a lecture at Kusum. The Singapore economic success and anti-corruption model, can it be adapted to Nepal? I must say, in the over 40 countries that I've spoken at, the Nepalese are the most hardworking. I've never been asked to deliver a lecture at 7 a.m. in the morning yesterday. And never before, as I have spoken in many universities around the world, have I been asked after my lecture, Mr. Leong, is it possible for you to come back on Saturday morning and deliver another lecture? And what would you like to speak on? I said, oh, okay. So this Saturday, I'm going back to Kusum to speak on the AI tsunami is coming. What should you do? I'm going to read this to you. Lessons for governance. In politics, governance is the overall process of decision-making and how a society's affairs, authority, and public resources are managed. It encompasses the formal institutions of the state, like the government and judiciary, as well as informal networks involving civil society and the private sector. And the source is the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Let me sum up this long paragraph. Governance is doing good for the people. Doing it not for only some of the people, but if possible, all the people. Do good and you will do well, not just in politics, but everything else. You can see on the screen, Singapore has the most top rankings in the world today. Number 1 in the world for most competitive economy. Number 1 for global talent competitiveness. And number 1 for GDP per capita, PPP, purchasing power parity. Number 2 for ease of doing business. I'm not going to go through the whole 50. But the fifth one, the next one, is the most important today. We are number 1 in the world for innovation. This is my first time in Nepal, and so I know very little about Nepal other than what I can search Google. This is what some of the issues that I found. If the AI has given me fake news or wrong information, I apologize. It says Nepal has political instability, economic stagnation, widespread youth discontent, recently leading to violent anti-corruption protests, high unemployment above 20%. In Singapore, the unemployment rate has almost always stayed at 2%, 1/10 of Nepal's unemployment rate. Corruption, slow infrastructure development. Singapore became independent in 1965. You know which country Singapore was trying to become? I spoke at the Harvard conference in Colombo last year, where I met my Nepalese friends who arranged for me to come this time round. And the keynote speaker said, Singapore wanted to emulate Ceylon when it became independent, because our founding Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew went to Ceylon and was very impressed with its peace and security. Today, where is Ceylon, now called Sri Lanka, and where is Singapore? One cannot try to adapt or examine the Singapore economic model without first talking about corruption. Singapore's Transparency International Corruption Ranking is we are the third least country in the world. You are 109. What is the problem with corruption? It impedes investor business confidence. When there is a lot of corruption in the country, people will think twice, coming to invest, coming to do business, maybe even coming to work, to study, or to visit as a tourist. So I'm going to start today to talk about the Singapore anti-corruption model and how we gradually eradicated corruption. The statistics just came out. Last year, we had the record lowest number of corruption cases prosecuted in the courts in Singapore history. In the whole of last year, there were only 68 corruption cases prosecuted in Singapore, the lowest in Singapore's history. So, what is the Singapore anti-corruption success model? 3 points. Number one, very easy to get caught. When I was a young boy, or even today, you have a phone number you can call and say, I think this person is corrupt. But of course, if you intentionally or maliciously accuse someone, you'll get into trouble as well. Very easy to get caught. The propaganda was tremendous. When I was a young boy, when you watched the TV, report advertisements, report corruption, report corruption. There was even the rumor boy, a son, who reported his father for corruption. Point number two, the penalty must be very, very severe. Our first cabinet minister found corruption. It was rumored that he was asked to hang himself. Anyway, he committed suicide. Last year, a cabinet minister was sentenced to 12 months jail for corruption. And what was the corruption? Football tickets, theater tickets, cheap $100 wines. The highest item of his so-called corruption was a flight he took on a private jet from his friend to go to another country to watch the F1, the Grand Prix. And mind you, this was the minister in charge of F1 in Singapore. And the flight he took was from the person who helped to bring in F1 into Singapore. So if you add all his corruption together, it was less than $50,000, 12 years jail sentence. So we consistently remind people that the penalty for corruption is very severe. Today, you give me $100, or I take it from you, or I give you, we will both go to jail for 3 to 6 months. Point number 3 is a bit more difficult and may take longer. In many of the countries that I've spoken at, civil servants cannot survive without corruption, simply because the pay is too low. So what do? We talk to civil servants. What are your financial concerns? What are your financial goals? Number 1, healthcare. What if I fall sick? My family falls sick. Okay. Free healthcare for civil servants. Number 2, a roof over my head. Okay. Not free, but very low cost public housing not just for civil servants, but for everybody else. Number 3, pension when I retire. Okay, free pension civil servants. And number 4, education for my children. Very low fees education, not just for civil servants, but for everybody else. So if you listen to me so far on point number 3, you must be thinking, oh, didn't all this cost the government a lot of money? Well, what actually happened at the end of the day, it did not cost the government a lot of money. Why? Because over the years, civil servants were offered conversion from the civil servant scheme to the ordinary healthcare and pension scheme of the ordinary citizens. I was a civil servant before, and most of us accepted the conversion. Why? To get your free healthcare and free pension, you must work without any break non-stop until 55 years old. If you stop anywhere in between, everything is gone. So most of us find that at the end of the day, it did not cost the state a lot of money. Next, let me talk about what I would say is something that very few people know, and even if you Google or you ask AI, or most of the literature on the Singapore success model, you probably may not know what I'm going to tell you. A very important factor to Singapore, you know, Singapore has been described as the economic miracle in modern times. And before I explain this to you, to start an example so you understand conceptually what is this. Let me take the UK as an example. You want to win votes, you promise more benefits. You win, you become the government, you need to collect more taxes in order to give the more benefits you promise. Oh, cannot, problem. So what do? You try to cut some benefits, even bigger problem. So at the end of the day, what do you have? Bigger budget deficits, higher external public debt. In many countries today, the burden of providing public goods and services like public housing, pensions, healthcare, rests almost in a sense solely the burden of the state. Now the Singapore model is quite unique because conceptually its provision of public goods and services and its fiscal policy is conceptually very similar to the Islamic finance concept of a sharing economy. What is a sharing economy? The stakeholders share the benefits and the risks. If you look at the Singapore model, the burden of providing public goods and services is shared between the people and the state. Let me give you some specific examples. Practically every city or country has a public housing problem. Why? Because every public flat they build, they lose money. Now in the Singapore public housing model, it's unique. From a cash flow perspective, the state does not lose money on every flat that they build, and therefore, arguably, they can build as many as they want. How is this possible? You see, in Singapore, if you can afford it and you want to, you can buy a bigger public flat in a more popular area and pay a higher price. The excess cash flows from this is then utilized to enable the very poor, the very low income to have public housing as well. For example, if you are poor, your household income is less than $1,500. You can buy a small public flat in a not very popular area for as little as maybe $10,000. How does that happen? If I'm not poor and low income, that house public flat actually costs $110,000. But because I'm poor, I get a subsidy. The maximum subsidy for a poor household to buy public housing is $120,000. And so in this example, he's buying maybe a slightly over 100,000 house, but he's only paying 10,000. Singapore won a UN Habitat Award for having one of the best public housing models in the world. Why? Because over 80% of the population lives in public housing. And more than 90% of those who live in public housing actually own their public flats. And public flats historically has been increasing at about 5% per annum. So it's just not a roof, right? It helps to grow your money. Now, for those who, for whatever reason, don't want or cannot even afford to buy a very low-cost public house, public rental in Singapore starts at 26 Singapore dollars a month. And mind you, Singapore is the most expensive city in the world. Remember I mentioned earlier, governments like Singapore get to stay in power for 60 years and possibly forever because they do good for almost the entire population. And this is one example. Let me give you another example. Most countries today, especially the developed countries, have a problem that is, we call never-ending problem. Because their national pension scheme keep costing the government more and more money every year that they cannot afford. Because they are using what we call the defined benefit system. People are promised a pension based on how much they contribute, how much they work with a national pension. And so in many countries today, there aren't enough young people to pay for the older people under this scheme. Now, Singapore is on a defined contribution benefit model. That means every Singaporean or permanent resident has his own pension account in the national pension scheme. Everyone contributes a percentage of his income to this account. And this is his own account. This account, part of it can be used for housing, part of it can be used for education for yourself or your children, part of it can be used for healthcare, and of course, the part of it can be used when you retire as your own pension. So if you look at it from a cash flow perspective, it doesn't cost the state a lot of money, right? Because it's your own money. Everyone have their own account. What is even better from a fiscal policy perspective is this. The state takes all the pension money, which is now about more than 600 billion Singapore dollars. They invest this money and they pay a fixed, guaranteed, no-risk interest to all the pension fund account holders. In most years, the return that the state derive is a little bit more than the interest that they pay. And so, on the average, today, every year, the state has an excess return of more than $10 billion from the pension scheme. And over the years, as you accumulate this, of course, in some years, there will be losses. You're actually paying your members more than what you get. But if you look at the annualized returns in history, it may accumulate to a few $100 billion. So this is one of the reasons why we have the Singapore economic miracle. Because it does not cost the state a lot of money. It's a sharing concept. The people and the state. And like to say, the state has tons of money to build infrastructure, to have social development, to help the less advantaged in society, the poor, the low income. But even more importantly now, we have tons of money for innovation. We have tons of money to help businesses to compete internationally. One more example. But before that, imagine a country is able to get the people to agree that all the pension money they give in, say, a national pension scheme, the state will invest it and say maybe they keep 0.5% of the return and give the rest back to the people. Singapore is a very small country, you know. In a big country, you do this, can you imagine the amount of money that the state has that they can work wonders with? One more third and last example, why even from a healthcare cash flow perspective, it does not cost the state a lot of money. Because the inflows every year almost equal or a bit less than the outflows. Let me just explain, giving one aspect of the Singapore healthcare system. If I go to hospital, public hospital, I can choose. Do I want a room to myself, one person, 2 to a room, 4 to a room, 6 to a room? Do I want priority in tests? If I pay more, I can get my test next week. If I pay the cheapest one, maybe I have to wait 1 or 2 months. I get to choose my doctor. I think this is the best doctor for this procedure, I choose him. If I pay the lower rates, I cannot choose the doctor. The computer will randomly assign one for me. But of course, if it's an emergency or urgent procedure, whether you are the cheapest C class compared to the highest A class, everybody gets the same treatment. But in this system, much similar to the sharing economy concept for public housing, which I explained earlier, those who can afford and want to pay more, and they're happy to do that, the excess cash flows then enable the state to provide, at least in the public healthcare system, almost universal quality healthcare. So if you are Singapore, you have no money, you choose the class C, the lowest class, you don't have to worry. Because after means testing, you have very low income, you have very little assets, your family also very low income or assets, almost as good as free. In the Singapore model, we have budget surpluses in about 4 out of every 5 years. Last year's budget surplus was 15.1 billion Singapore dollars. How much is that in Nepali rupees? I'm told I have to multiply this figure by 110 times to get the equivalent in Nepal. 1 year budget surplus. Can you imagine over the years, the accumulation, the interest earned? So the economic miracle is derived from decades of the people and the state working together in consensus to build a nation that when it became independent had nothing, no natural resources, no army, I would say, no nothing. Just showing you some numbers, budget surpluses accumulated, budget surpluses according to IMF fiscal accounting guidelines, which is even higher, because under IMF fiscal guidelines, some of the inflows are not counted in our budget accounting system, and some of the outflows that are charged as expenditure in 1 year for future expenditure under IMF fiscal accounting guidelines are also not counted as expenditures. We have the highest reserves per capita in the world. It's estimated that we have more than $2 trillion in the reserves. Let me take a pause now. Like all good things, there must be bad. The price of the Singapore economic miracle. Most tired, fatigued nation in the world, according to the latest rankings. Most depressed nation in Asia. Fourth lowest birth rate in the world. 149 out of 157 countries in the 2018, this is the latest I can find, Oxfam commitment to reducing inequality index. Singapore was ranked as the second least likely to help a stranger in 2013. We consistently rank as one of the longest working hours in the world. Recent surveys and reports indicate that 73% of employees are unhappy and 62% feel burnout. 2 in 5 Singaporeans report waking up tired every day. This is a survey report from the Singapore Business Review. So, if you try to adapt some aspects of the Singapore model, my suggestion to you, please don't overdo things, don't overly focus on economic development, right? Balance the economic development with balance of life and simply being happy. A very funny ranking that we have is that we are the second lowest in the world for libido. It's a very bad ranking, right? But actually, it's a very good ranking, and I'll explain to you why. How do you measure libido? You ask, right? How often do you do it? How was your performance? How did your partner rate your performance? You know, are you still doing it when you are, 72, etc., etc.? And because Singaporeans are very honest people, they tell the truth, that's why they are ranked so low. And that's why it's a very good ranking, because if you go to a country to invest, to do business, to work, right, to study, to visit a tourist, you like the people to be very honest. So this is one example. Very bad ranking, but actually a very good one. So far, I've thought about the past and a bit about the present. What is more important now is the future. So what is Singapore doing now for the future? But before that, we take a step back. Singapore, 744 square kilometers, 6.1 million population. But look at the amount of investment we have in the world. Stock of Singapore's direct investment abroad, DIA, by the corporate sector alone, $1.653 trillion, more than 2 trillion in reserves. So, the challenge for Singapore today is to make innovation our number one priority. Our R&D spending averaged about 2.2% of GDP, 13.8 billion in 2023. We are ranked for a top global spot for indicators like government effectiveness and FDI net inflows. Our leading sectors are very diverse. Most patent active domestic fields in Singapore include computer technology, biotech, R&D based diagnostics, clean energy. We are ranked number 2 in the world for International Property Rights Index. You see, we are a very small country. So while large countries like China, the United States and Japan have the highest absolute number of patents, Singapore is a top-tier performer when benchmarking for innovation quality, IP protection strength, and patents relative to its size. We don't have quantity, but we have relatively very high quality. We are the 6th globally for international patent applications per million inhabitants. 11 for total patent grants, 14 for most idea-intensive nation. For foreign investment, more than 85% of patent applications are filed by foreign entities, showing Singapore's attractiveness as a IP hub. This is our future. This is our focus now. But when you talk about the future, like you watch the movie Back to the Future, you must go back and look at history. How the innovations in Singapore. In the 70s, you have suggestion boxes. You put one suggestion, you get $5. I have a friend whose son, after graduating, submitted 50 suggestions in his first year at work. So he had $250, $5 times 50. But his suggestions were so good, his pay was increased from 7,000 to 20,000 in 1 year, and was given a very important position by the CEO. So another very important aspect of the Singapore model is meritocracy. Try to attract the best, reward the best, encourage the best. Try not to have nepotism. Of course, even in the 60s, we have quality circles that focus on innovation. It originated in Japan in 1962. They focus on improving quality, productivity, safety through a structured bottom-up approach. Singapore started a cut waste panel in 2003, and they're still around. Public feedback and reduced wasteful practices. In the first year alone, they had 500 plus suggestions to eliminate inefficiency. Let's look at what was announced in the budget this year in Singapore in February. I'm sorry if I put so much emphasis on innovation, because just for Singapore, in my view, the world is becoming increasingly difficult, challenging, and competitive, especially for developing countries. And in my humble view, innovation is the best, if not the only way to compete internationally and stay ahead of your competitors. We announced an innovation fund of $37 billion, which is about 1% of GDP, research, innovation and enterprise 2030 plan, 5-year. I believe we are one, if not the very few countries that has arranged with an AI to enable all the students to have access to very good AI tools. Enterprise Innovation Scheme, 400% tax deduction, up to 400,000 per activity. What does this mean? You spend 100,000 on innovation. Come to filing your income tax, you get to claim 400,000. We consistently engage and encourage and motivate not just businesses, individuals, universities, individuals to innovate. Productivity Solutions Grant to improve productivity and automate existing processes through IT solutions and equipment. Up to 50% of eligible costs for local SMEs. SME is the backbone of Singapore's economic success. 99% of the businesses in Singapore are SMEs. They employ 70% of the workforce. They contribute to almost 50% of the GDP. We consistently engage SMEs. The state agencies, the universities, the trade associations, the professional bodies, we keep engaging the SMEs to talk to them. How can we help you? How can we together help you? So that Singapore can continue to remain as number one. How come this slide is slanted? There is a purpose to this. I want to emphasize to you that innovation is not about rocket science or you must have a patent or invent something technological breakthrough. No. Sometimes innovation, the more important ones, is simply common sense. Let me give you some examples. In 1 year we had a recession, so we asked the companies, how can we help you, especially the foreign companies? So they said, oh, you know your pension contribution rate is very high. Can you reduce it to help us to reduce our costs? We are the only country in the world that has reduced in a recession the pension contribution rate from 50 to 30%. You try that in some other country, I think that's why no other country has done it. I think the government will out of job within months. But why do we keep doing things like that? We want to send the message to the whole world that Singapore is the best place to do business, to invest. We bend over our backs to help. We keep asking them, how can we help? Let me give you another one, perhaps even more funny. There was another recession. So we asked the companies, how can we help you? You know we have no business, right? So can we send our workers to go on leave? Go on leave, we don't have to pay them. Okay. But when we have business, we after they come back, if we don't have money to pay them, can we ask them to work without pay or part pay? But of course, when we have money, we will pay them back what we owe them. The answer is sure, why not? Can any other country do that? So far, not yet. But here's another great example. How a simple idea can propel a small nation to be number one in so many things. Another one, we had a tourist who was cheated by the merchant in Singapore. SIA, our national airline, which was ranked the best airline for many years, flew the tourist back from Japan in business class to testify in court. That was the best advertisement, not just for SIA, right, but for anyone, whether it's tourism, study, or work. We started with a skills development fund many years ago. Each get $400 to go and learn, you know. Now it's $4,000. So you can use this $4,000 to attend a few thousand courses, formal, informal courses, in practically every area. We want to motivate and support a learning society. But of course, you will keep have this question in your mind. Where do you get all the money to do all this? The sharing economy. The sharing of between the state and the people, so that the state does not need to spend a lot of money. Let me talk about education. Practically all the university students in Singapore are on a tuition loan. That means the state doesn't have to pay. They are paying their own tuition, interest-free. After they graduate, 6 months after they graduate, they are given 10 years to pay, then the interest starts. So people ask me, how do you get the banks to, give free tuition loan, no interest while they are studying? I will explain to you in this way. Many of the institutions in Singapore are started by the state, then become privatized, or still majority owned by the state. Our biggest bank was started by the state. It's a private bank. But you see, many of these institutions have a social mission. And so the social mission is, can we help the state so they don't have to spend so much on university? Everyone takes the tuition, and in order to encourage it, no interest. Would any bank want to give no interest tuition to every university student? The answer is no. But in the Singapore history, Singapore experience, if the largest bank gives free interest, if the other bank, the other two local banks do not follow, you will lose competitiveness, right? So I'm just giving you one example, how private institutions that are started by the state or still majority or minority owned by the state actually do things that a normal for-profit business will never do because they have a social mission in mind. went to Germany one year to try to figure out why Germany consistently has, at that time, the highest productivity almost every year of the countries in the world. You know what I found out? The most important reason why they are so productive, every Friday night, the whole company goes drinking. Innovation. So what is innovation? Trying to do things differently. If possible, try to do something that has never been done before. Let me tell you a personal experience. I was speaking at, I think, the OAS General Assembly Business Roundtable in the Dominican Republic. Halfway, I crumpled my presentation and I threw it at the audience. The audience were mostly prime ministers and presidents. They thought it was a terrorist attack. And I explained, you know why I did that? I want to emphasize to you, Singapore is where it is today because we try very, very hard to be different. And everybody was so happy. I had a standing ovation. Next, let me say, is perhaps the most important questions that any country or city or state or even institution, if they want to adapt a model like Singapore. Most people, you read in the literature, they focus on, oh, why you become successful. No. What is even more important? What were the mistakes? What were the setbacks? What were the lessons that we learned? What were the obstacles? What were the failures? What is arguably the criticism even today? What we are doing that is not right, that is wrong, that if you think we are still doing this similar, if not new mistakes, that is even more important if you are trying to adapt the model. We have our most famous entrepreneur who has passed away. His name was Sim Wong Hoo. He coined what Singaporeans very effectively call the no U-turn mindset. You see, in Singapore, he said, when you drive a road, you can only make a U-turn when you see there's a U-turn sign that you can turn. He said, that's wrong. That's not entrepreneurship. That's not creativity. That's not innovation. It should be, you travel on the road, as long as you see no sign, you can turn. You see the difference in the mindset? You know, one of the biggest mistakes arguably we made in the beginning was we set up three incubator companies to promote entrepreneurship. One of my classmates was the CEO of one of them. Didn't work. A top-down approach to entrepreneurship innovation, as we have learned in the early years, don't work very well. Let me tell you the funniest, the simplest innovation that nobody has done recently. In 2024, Taylor Swift came to Singapore to do a concert. What's so innovative or never done before? We struck a deal with Taylor Swift. She can only hold a concert in Singapore and nowhere else in Southeast Asia. And so all the countries in Southeast Asia were very angry. How can you do that? Nobody has done that. But what was the outcome? We estimate more than $300 million was spent by the people coming with their families, and after they watched the concert, they stay on, they were eating, they were enjoying themselves, they were staying in hotels, right? We estimate that 300,000 people came, contributed to GDP and so on. So I keep emphasizing, innovation is not research in a university. Innovation, maybe and often arguably the most successful ones are the very simple ones. Singapore has no famous brands like the Koreans, no Samsung, no LG. Because we are a small country. How do we compete with the big countries in what they are doing well? We cannot compete with countries that are ahead by doing the same thing. We must do something differently or do something never done before. I helped to organize 2 VC, venture capital forums, and not surprising, all the VCs said, yeah, most our successful VCs were collaboration between Singapore and foreign companies. very few Singapore companies were successful according to the VC. So, in one word, after so many minutes of innovation, what is the secret to the Singapore innovation model today? The melting pot. What is the melting pot? Every month, every other month, we hold very big events. AI event, tech event, innovation event. 21,000 people come, investors, inventors, students, entrepreneurs, governments, they all network, they do everything, and then things happen. Whether they happen in Singapore, in another country, between Singapore and another country, whatever, this is the simplest thing to do, right? You just get a lot of people together and then things will happen. So this is, in my view, the secret, or hopefully, will be what propels Singapore into the future for innovation. For example, we have a conference called Slingshot. Slingshot, your startup in the world through Singapore. 6,800 startups from over 150 markets came, 60 top global startups, 300 exhibitors. Another one, Asia's most exciting tech startup, 20,000 people came. You see, please play video. I don't have time. It's a short video to show you a promotional video on one of these events. Thank you for listening to me for so long. It is now my final slide. But before that, my final message to you is this. Try not to do things that you have always done or most other people are doing. I delivered a lecture at Kusum yesterday, and I said, too many research projects, courses on the traditional research like thematic research, comparative studies, replicative studies, very easy to pass, but no meaning. So I told the students and the professors, try to ask yourself these few questions. Number one, what is the impact of what I'm trying to do on my profession, on my community, on my country, and if possible, internationally? What is the impact? What is the outcome? How will what I do cause people to do what? What is the outcome? Am I trying to do something that is different? And better still, try to do something that nobody has done before. Like in my favorite TV program, that most of you would not have been born when it started, Star Trek, go boldly where no man has gone before. I wrote a book. I fly so much. Nothing better to do on the plane. Since I'm coming to Nepal, I wrote a book. It's an e-book, not print book. The Singapore anti-corruption and economic model, can it be adapted to Nepal? It's available at Barnes and Noble. I used to give my e-books free. Then the publishing platform, no, cannot give free. Then I put $1, so they said no. So this one only $5. Thank you very much.